Marcus Dellum was 38 years old on the night his wife returned his ring in front of 470 people who had no idea they were watching the most expensive mistake any of them would ever witness. He had driven to the Omni Charlotte Hotel from his house on Morningside Drive in Dilworth, parked the gray Tahoe himself because the valet line was backed up and he did not mind walking. And he had arrived at the ballroom at 7:12 with the same unhurried quiet he brought to every room he ever entered. He had a grease mark on his left thumb that would not come off entirely, the kind that settles into the lines of your skin after years of field work, and he had rubbed it with his handkerchief in the elevator without being able to do much about it. That mark was the only thing in that building that told the truth about him. What the room saw when Marcus Dellum sat down at table 9 was a man in a dark suit who did not quite fit. The jacket good, but not bespoke. The tie 1 season behind. The posture of someone accustomed to standing in open terrain rather than seated in ballrooms, draped in gold linen. What the room did not see, what not one of the 470 people inside the Varden Group's 30th anniversary gala had any means of knowing, was that the quiet man at table 9 had finalized a $13 trillion sovereign energy transit agreement at 10:22 that same morning in a suite on the 23rd floor of the Westin Center City, 3 miles away, and that as of the moment he walked through the Omni's front doors, his personal net worth was $8 billion, fully structured, entirely premarital, and invisible to every person in that room who had spent the better part of a decade deciding he was not worth their full attention. Simone had planned the evening's other event. He understood that by the 3rd sentence of her speech. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. To understand what happened at that ballroom, you have to understand what the ballroom was. The Varden Group's 30th anniversary was the kind of event Raymond Varden had spent 11 months engineering. The way a man engineers the things he believes reflect his permanent place in the order of things. The space had cost $91,000. Marcus had seen the deposit confirmation on the shared desktop 3 months earlier and said nothing. He said nothing about most things. There were city council members present, 2 state senators, and the kind of energy contacts whose names appeared in both the Wall Street Journal and the Charlotte Business Journal, depending on which story was being told. Raymond Varden had built his petroleum logistics consulting firm from a 2-room office in South Park into a $310 million enterprise, and he wore that fact the way a man wears a second tuxedo. He had met Simone in the winter of 2010 at UNC Charlotte. In an advanced geophysics seminar she was auditing for a graduate elective, and he was attending because subsurface formation analysis was the only field of study that had ever felt to him like genuine truth. She was 25 and beautiful and trailing the particular ease of a woman who had never needed to negotiate for a seat at any table. He was 26, on a full scholarship, the first person in his family from Concord to leave for a university and not come back within the year. His grandmother Estelle had pressed 2 folded bills into his hand the morning he drove away and said, "The ground holds more than what you can see. Learn to read what's underneath." He had written it in his field journal the same evening. They were married in 2012. Raymond Varden paid for the wedding. That fact had never been allowed to expire. The Varden home in Myers Park was the kind of house where every room was arranged to make a visitor feel slightly smaller than they had on the way in. At the first holiday party Marcus attended, in December of 2013, Raymond introduced him to 3 industry colleagues as Simone's husband. Full stop. No profession offered. No context given. As if the totality of Marcus Dellum began and ended in relation to his wife. Marcus had thanked the men, shaken their hands, and spent the rest of the evening listening to a conversation about the North Carolina energy corridor that he could have run from either side of the table. He did not say so. Damon was the other weather system. Raymond's son was 34. Had his father's confidence and none of his father's discipline, and had arrived at his personal theory of Marcus somewhere around year 2 of the marriage without ever revisiting it. He had a name for him in the family's inner orbit, the Surveyor. He said it as a joke, with just enough of a smile to make correction seem like an overreaction. Marcus heard it first at a 4th of July cookout in 2015. He filed it the way he filed most things, in the part of his mind that kept careful records. And Simone, who had loved him once with something that felt structural and true. She had never corrected her father's introductions. She had never redirected the dinner table conversation back to Marcus when the room moved around him. She had made a calculation somewhere in the first years of the marriage, and the calculation was that her family's approval was worth more than her husband's dignity, and she had never revisited the math. What they did not know, what none of them understood, was that Marcus Dellum's silence was not emptiness. It was architecture. He had incorporated Dellum Subsurface Partners through a Delaware-registered agent in March of 2011, 14 months before the wedding. He had done it in Celestine Okafor's D.C. office on a Wednesday morning, signed the papers with a pen she set on the table without ceremony, and flown back to Charlotte that afternoon. Simone had asked him how the trip was. He had said fine. They had eaten takeout from the Thai place on East Boulevard. He had written 4 lines in the Field Journal before bed. The work itself had taken 9 years to build into what it became. 9 years of fieldwork across coastal basin formations in West Africa. 4 mineral transit rights acquisitions structured through Dellum Subsurface Partners. Infrastructure holding agreements managed through Celestine's firm with the particular precision she applied to everything. His business card said Senior Geological Analyst, Carolinas Energy Development Board. That was true. It was the smallest true thing about him. The Meridian Basin arrangement had begun in 2019. Celestine ran a legitimate energy data intermediary called Meridian Basin Analytics from her D.C. address. And through Meridian, Marcus had licensed his own proprietary subsurface survey data to Varden Group as an anonymous third-party subscription. The data was real. It was his. It represented 7 years of coastal and deep water basin analysis that Raymond's team had neither the geological expertise nor the field access to produce. Marcus priced it below market, renewed it each year without escalation, and never gave any indication, at any dinner table, at any holiday gathering, that the quiet man Raymond introduced without a title was the foundation the whole operation was standing on. He had done it for Simone. The premarital trust protected him entirely. But the license was different. The license was an act of quiet, unannounced love for a woman whose financial security was inseparable from her father's firm. If things fell apart, and he had known for 2 years that they would, he wanted her to have something intact on the other side. In the fall of 2022, Raymond accepted the Carolinas Energy Analytics Award from the State Industry Association. His speech ran 11 minutes. He mentioned proprietary methodology. He mentioned intellectual infrastructure. He did not mention Meridian Basin Analytics, because he did not know Meridian Basin Analytics existed as anything other than a vendor account number on an invoice his operations director approved automatically each year. 6 weeks before the gala, Celestine sent the annual Meridian renewal packet. Marcus opened it at his desk in the home office on a Monday evening with the gospel station playing low from the small speaker on the bookshelf, the way his grandmother Estelle had always kept a radio going somewhere in the house, not for the noise but for the company. He read the documents the way he always read them, He set the pen on the desk. For the first time in 4 years, he did not pick it up. He sat with that decision for a long time, not because he was uncertain, because he understood its full weight and he wanted to hold it before he moved. Then he closed the file, placed the field journal in his jacket pocket, and called Celestine. A subsurface engineer knows that the most significant structural events are rarely announced. They accumulate. They express themselves in small, specific data points, a hairline, a pressure reading, a shift in the formation's acoustic profile that individually mean nothing and collectively mean everything. You have to be willing to trust the instruments even when the surface looks unchanged. Celestine Okafor's DC office occupied the 15th floor of a building on L Street with no exterior signage beyond the floor number. She had run energy law and trust architecture for 27 years, entirely by referral, for clients who required that the work never surface in the kind of searches lawyers on the other side ran before depositions. She was 61, wore reading glasses on a chain, and spoke in the precise, unhurried cadence of someone who had never once needed to raise her voice to be understood in a conference room. She was already at the table when Marcus arrived on the morning of the gala at 8:45, the documents in 4 organized stacks, a yellow legal pad to her left, 2 glasses of water placed symmetrically from the edge. She gestured to the chair across from her and said they should begin. The agreement represented 9 years of geological survey work, 7 years of subsurface rights acquisition, and 4 years of transit infrastructure positioning across the West African coastal corridor. 3 sovereign governments, Senegal, Ghana, and Cameroon, had executed their framework agreements over the preceding 16 months. What remained was Marcus's personal broker conveyance documents, the final transfer of Delum Subsurface Partners holdings into the consolidated entity, and the execution of the largest private energy brokerage agreement in the history of the continent. $13 trillion. Celestine walked through each document in her methodical way, finger moving along the margins, voice level and without decoration. The transit corridor rights, the pipeline access agreements, the deepwater platform conveyances, the royalty structure that positioned Delum Subsurface Partners as the permanent infrastructure intermediary for the full output life cycle of the surveyed basin. She explained that Marcus's personal net worth upon execution would be $3.8 billion, fully structured within the premarital Delaware Trust and entirely outside the reach of any dissolution proceeding. She said this not as reassurance. She said it as legal fact, the way she said all legal facts, flatly, like a door that is already closed. Celestine set the pen on the table at 10:19. Marcus picked it up at 10:22 and signed 3 signature lines. Broker, conveyance, trust transfer, infrastructure consolidation. 3 signatures, 29 seconds. Celestine reached across and shook his hand once. Firmly, she said, "Well done." That was the entire ceremony. Neither of them needed more than that. She gathered the folders and then asked the one remaining open question. She asked about the Meridian non-renewal. She asked whether the sequence they had discussed should proceed as planned. Marcus thought about it for the length of time it deserved. He said, proceed as planned. He would attend the gala and do nothing that night. Celestine should begin positioning Monday morning through the established channels, quietly, in the order they had agreed. Celestine wrote 4 lines on her legal pad. She did not ask why he wanted to be in that room. She had known Marcus long enough to understand that some decisions were not strategic. Some were simply human. He reached into his jacket and placed the field journal on the table. It landed with the soft, substantial weight of something that had been carried a long way through difficult terrain. Celestine looked at it the way she always looked at it, with the particular recognition of someone who had spent years translating its shorthand into the language of binding legal instruments. Marcus put it back in his pocket. he stood. He took the long way out of the building and stopped at a coffee shop on Rhode Island Avenue, where the woman behind the counter called him sweetheart without irony, the way his grandmother always had. And he sat at a corner table for 20 minutes and drank his coffee and watched an ordinary Thursday morning move past outside. Then, he drove back to Charlotte. He would sit in that ballroom for 3 hours knowing exactly what he knew. That final act of stillness was not the absence of feeling. It was the last deliberate choice of a man who had already completed the work and was simply waiting for the world to find out. Marcus was back in Celestine's office at 9 on Monday morning. He described the gala the way he described most things, precisely, without editorializing, in the order it occurred. Arrived at 7:12. Table 9, near the service corridor. Damon with his phone out before Simone reached the second sentence. The microphone, the ring in the water glass. Raymond rising. The post live before Marcus reached the parking structure. He described it in the same measured tone a man might use to describe a delayed flight, not because he felt nothing, but because feeling was not the instrument the moment required. Celestine listened. When he finished, she said, "Then we proceed fully." She walked through the 4 moves in sequence. The first was the Meridian non-renewal notice. Formal termination from Meridian Basin Analytics to Varden Group. Certified mail, 90-day transition window for read-only access. The license holder listed would be Delum Subsurface Partners, which, to any investigator at Varden Group, would resolve to a Delaware limited liability company with no registered website, no public-facing officers, no searchable presence in any industry registry. A wall of legal nothing. The second was the Southeast Capital due diligence flag. Celestine controlled a third-party compliance advisory called Hargrove Assessment Services that operated entirely within her firm's client infrastructure. Hargrove would submit an anonymous data integrity inquiry to Southeast Capital's merger due diligence team, specifically questioning the provenance and continuity of Varden Group's analytical product line. Southeast Capital's legal team would be obligated to investigate. If Varden Group could not demonstrate clean, uninterrupted data ownership, the $740 million merger would stall. It would not unstall. The third was Damon's fund position. The Carolina Basin Investment Fund that Marcus had seeded as a goodwill gesture to Damon in 2020 operated under a managing partner arrangement Celestine oversaw through her fiduciary structure. The managing partner would issue a 72-hour redemption notice under a standard portfolio restructuring provision. Damon would receive a check for his full $4 million position and a letter offering no explanation. There was nothing to trace. Nothing had been built to be found. The fourth was the dissolution asset documentation. Simone's attorney would receive a complete Delum Subsurface Partners disclosure package in response to discovery, the pre-marital incorporation date of March 2011, the full asset inventory, the trust structure, every mineral rights holding and infrastructure conveyance, all of it time-stamped to before the wedding. Simone's attorney would open that package and understand immediately that there was nothing to claim. There had never been anything to claim. Marcus listened to all 4 moves without expression. When Celestine finished, he asked whether any of it could be traced back to him by name before he chose to be named. Celestine said no. She said it like a door closing on a room that would not need to be revisited. Marcus said, "Proceed." Not with anger, not with satisfaction. The way you say a true thing when the time has finally come, with the quiet authority of a man who has been more patient than patience required, and has now simply decided to be done. Real power operated in quiet rooms. He had always known that. He had simply been willing to wait for the right room. Celestine sent the first notice at 11:17. The certified letter arrived at Varden Group's South Park front desk on a Tuesday. Meridian Basin Analytics return address. Raymond's assistant signed for it, placed it in his message tray, and went back to her desk without a second thought. Raymond opened it at 2 in the afternoon between meetings. He read it once, then again. Then he set it down and called his operations director and told him to get the legal team in the conference room by 4 o'clock. 9 sentences, no reason given. No contact name. No negotiation pathway. By end of week, the legal team could not identify the license holder. Delum Subsurface Partners resolved to a Delaware LLC with no public-facing officers, no website, no searchable presence in any energy database. A wall of nothing, clean and absolute, like the entity had been built specifically to resist exactly this kind of search, which it had. Damon spent 45 minutes Thursday running every variation he could think of. He found nothing. He told Raymond the name was a ghost. Without the Meridian data feed, Varden Group's Q4 client reports could not be completed. The reports were built on the subsurface analytics the license provided. Without it, the methodology Raymond had presented to clients as the firm's proprietary intellectual architecture had no foundation. 7 major client engagements, each valued at $7 million, were now stalled. Gulf Coast Refinery Partners called Thursday afternoon. Raymond told his assistant to say the report was in final review. He said it with the confidence of a man who did not yet understand how deep the formation had shifted. He called Simone that evening. He asked if Marcus had ever mentioned a company called Delum Subsurface Partners. Simone said she had never heard that name. She called Marcus immediately. She called twice. He did not answer. She texted. He did not respond. Friday morning, Southeast Capital's legal team sent a formal inquiry to Varden Group's deal counsel. Data integrity flag. Third-party compliance submission. Varden Group was asked to provide documentation demonstrating the chain of ownership, continuity, and licensing rights for the subsurface analytical data underlying the firm's flagship product line. The inquiry noted that the due diligence process for the $740 million merger could not advance until documentation was received and reviewed. Raymond read the letter standing at his desk. He read it 3 times. He called his attorney, Preston Galt, who had handled Varden Group's corporate matters for 14 years. Preston told him clearly that if the data provenance could not be established, the merger timeline was in serious jeopardy. He said Southeast Capital's legal team was precise and well-resourced and would not advance on incomplete documentation. He said Raymond needed to find out who Delum Subsurface Partners was. Raymond said he was working on it. He had no mechanism to work on it. He had accepted the data the way you accept electricity, as a condition of the landscape, without asking who built the infrastructure. That kind of assumption, Marcus's grandmother used to say, is what happens when a man mistakes the surface for the whole story. Friday evening, after the office had emptied, Raymond Varden sat alone in his corner office and looked out at the Charlotte skyline. The room was quiet in a way it had never been quiet. Not peaceful. Hollow. 72 hours from that moment, a headline would make everything devastatingly clear. Southeast Capital withdrew on a Monday morning. 1 letter. 17 months of work. Raymond's retirement architecture. Gone in 8 sentences. That same Monday, 5 major clients placed formal holds on their quarterly engagements. 11. $9 million in expected Q4 revenue suspended. Tuesday, Damon's phone rang. Managing partner of the Carolina Basin Investment Fund. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. When Damon hung up, He sat at his desk and stared at the wall. A redemption check for $4 million was being processed. Full position liquidated under a standard portfolio restructuring provision. No explanation, no recourse. He called Raymond. Raymond had no answers. He called Simone. Simone had no answers either. That was the point. Wednesday, Simone's attorney laid a 12-page document summary on a conference table and explained it carefully. Every significant asset, the Dilworth House, 4 investment accounts, mineral rights holdings in western North Carolina and coastal Louisiana, was held entirely within Delum Subsurface Partners, a Delaware entity incorporated in March of 2011. 14 months before the wedding. The trust predated the marriage entirely. Under North Carolina family law, with the structure Celestine had built, there was nothing to claim. Simone's attorney used the word airtight. She said it once and did not reach for a gentler version. Simone asked about the house. Her attorney told her the house was not hers. Thursday, Varden Group's chief financial officer presented Raymond with a solvency projection. Without the merger and without the client renewals, the firm would reach functional insolvency within 16 months. Raymond read the document twice, turned it face down, and did not speak. Friday morning, the Charlotte Business Journal published its 6 a.m. The headline read, Charlotte geologist Marcus Delum brokers historic $13 trillion sovereign energy agreement. 16 paragraphs. Marcus Delum, named as lead independent broker for the Pacific Infrastructure Consortium's West African Energy Transit Framework. Delum Subsurface Partners described as the private holding entity controlling the infrastructure rights at the center of the agreement. A photograph of Marcus in a conference room that Simone recognized immediately. The particular way the light fell against the windows on L Street, a building she had visited once 3 years earlier when Marcus told her he had a meeting with a Federal Energy Board liaison. He had not been wrong about the meeting. Damon saw the article at 7:15. He searched Delum Subsurface Partners. This time, the search returned results. The Charlotte Business Journal article. 3 trade mentions. A consortium press release. A Delaware corporate registration dated March 2011. He sat very still. He searched Marcus Delum. He searched Pacific Infrastructure Consortium. He searched the Meridian Basin account number from the non-renewal letter. Everything connected at once, the way a geological survey resolves when you have finally accumulated enough data points to see the full formation. He called Raymond. He said the words slowly, the way you say something you have no framework for. He said, the data license, the trust, the merger, it's all the same person. He said, it's Marcus. Raymond did not respond for a long time. Simone saw the article at 8:30. She saw it because her phone had already received 4 messages about it before she was fully awake. She read it standing in the kitchen of the Dilworth house that was not legally her house. She read it twice. She looked at the photograph. She looked at the date of the Delaware incorporation. She counted backward to the wedding and sat down at the kitchen table with the phone in her hand. She opened LinkedIn. Her post, the one Damon had filmed and uploaded from the ballroom, the one with her caption reading, "Sometimes the bravest thing a woman can do is know her worth," had 4,800 comments and was still climbing. She tried to delete it. The page loaded slowly. By the time the function processed, the screenshots were already across 6 platforms. She could not reach them. She called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. She said his name. She said she had seen the article. Marcus said, "Celestine will be in touch." Then he ended the call. Simone sat in the kitchen with the gospel station, playing low from the small speaker Marcus had put on the counter in 2017 because the mornings were too quiet without it, and the article still open on her screen. And for the first time in 12 years of marriage to Marcus Dellum, she understood the full architecture of the ground she had been standing on. She had been standing on him. Every award Raymond accepted, every standing ovation, every $7 million engagement bearing the Varden name, every time someone at that dinner table talked over the quiet man in the good but not bespoke jacket, and she had said nothing. She understood it the way you understand a geological survey when someone shows you the complete cross-section, not gradually, all at once. And there was nothing left to do with that understanding except wait for Celestine to be in touch. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks after the Charlotte Business Journal article and 5 weeks after the gala. Celestine's conference room on L Street. Both attorneys present. Formal asset disclosure under the dissolution proceedings. No family, no audience. 4 people in a room, and the truth that had been building for 12 years. Simone arrived first with her attorney, Phyllis Greer, a careful and experienced woman who had handled high-asset dissolutions in the Carolinas for 18 years and believed she had encountered every variation this kind of meeting could produce. She had not encountered this one. Marcus arrived at 10 o'clock exactly. Dark suit. Understated. Nothing in his hands. He sat down across from Simone, reached into his inside jacket pocket, and placed the field journal on the table between them. The worn brown leather landed with the quiet, certain weight of something that had traveled a very long way. Simone looked at it the way you look at something you have seen 1,000 times and are only now, finally, reading correctly. Phyllis Greer opened with a procedural summary. She spoke for approximately 70 seconds before Celestine set her pen down flat on the table and said, quietly, that she would like to give Marcus the floor. Phyllis looked at Celestine. Celestine looked back with the patience of a woman who had never once been uncertain in a conference room. Phyllis stopped talking. Marcus looked at Simone, not at the table, not at the lawyers, at her directly, the way he had always looked when he had something true to say, which had not happened between them often enough for either of them to notice until now. He spoke for 4 minutes. His voice did not rise once. He said he was not there to discuss the gala. It did not require discussion. He understood it. He said what he wanted to do, before this chapter closed, was make sure she understood the complete picture of what she had been living inside. Because she deserved that clarity. And because it was the last true thing he intended to give her. He said, in 2019, a data intermediary called Meridian Basin Analytics began supplying Varden Group with proprietary subsurface survey data. That data was licensed anonymously through Dellum Subsurface Partners. Dellum Subsurface Partners is my company. I incorporated it in Delaware in March of 2011. Every client report your father sold as proprietary Varden Group analysis since 2019 was built on my survey work. Every award he accepted, every excellence citation, every $7 million engagement your family's name was attached to. I priced the license below market and renewed it every single year because your financial security was tied to that firm's health, and I was not willing to let you lose that because of what was happening between us. Simone did not move. He said, the Dilworth house, the investment accounts, the mineral holdings, all of it, has been inside Dellum Subsurface Partners since before we were married. There is nothing in this marriage to claim because I structured it that way from the beginning. Not to harm you. To protect myself. The way any person with the sense to think ahead protects themselves before they are certain of the future. You will receive a fair settlement. Celestine has arranged it. You will be financially stable. That was always the intention. Even now, Phyllis Greer had stopped writing. Her pen rested against the legal pad at an angle that suggested it had been set down mid-sentence, and not retrieved. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small, clear envelope on the table beside the journal. The ring was inside it, catching the morning light from the L Street windows. He said, "This is yours." Then he said the thing the room had been waiting for, in the same quiet voice he had used for every word before it. He said, "You spent 12 years helping your family decide I was the background of every room I walked into. What you did not know, what none of them knew, was that your father's firm has been running on my work since 2019, and I renewed the license every single year because I loved you. I stopped 6 weeks ago. I signed the deal that morning. You put the ring in my water glass 9 hours later. The room held that for a long time." Simone did not respond. She did not reach for the envelope. She sat the way people sit when the full weight of something enormous has landed on them at once and the body has not yet found a way to organize itself around it. Marcus closed the field journal. He stood. He buttoned the top button of his jacket. He looked at Celestine once, and Celestine gave him the smallest nod. Then, Marcus Dellum walked out of the conference room and did not look back. The field journal stayed on the table. He did not need it anymore. Everything it had ever contained had already happened. Outside on L Street, a car was waiting in the gray November light. Marcus got in. The door closed. The car moved into traffic. And behind him, a family was beginning, quietly, and without the dignity they had always assumed was their permanent condition, to understand the full cost of spending 12 years confusing a man's silence with his ceiling. 7 months later, the world had settled into its permanent new shape. Varden Group restructured in February under a debt for equity arrangement that valued the company at roughly 28 cents on the dollar it had carried the previous October. The energy consulting community in Charlotte noticed. Nobody said much publicly, because that world keeps a long memory, and the story of what had happened to Varden Group's flagship analytical product had moved through the right channels in the particular whisper that is more permanent than any headline. Raymond Varden announced his retirement in March. The statement said nothing about data provenance. The standing ovation he had led in that ballroom was the last time a room of industry peers would rise for him. Damon left Charlotte in February. He took a regional account management position with a commercial property firm in Raleigh, sold the South End condo below asking, and removed himself from LinkedIn entirely. The gala video, his narration approving and bright and preserved in the audio, lived on in screenshots across a dozen platforms. He had filmed a monument to his own blind contempt, and the internet had decided that kind of monument does not come down. Simone relocated to Raleigh in March. She took a communications director role with a regional arts nonprofit, set her LinkedIn to private the week the Charlotte Business Journal story ran, and never made it public again. The post with 4,800 comments existed in perpetuity in screenshots she could not reach. She had learned at considerable cost that the audience she had always performed for was not the one that held any power. The dissolution finalized in January. Marcus had instructed Celestine to structure Simone's settlement generously. She left with $5 million in cash, a vehicle clear of any lien, and a financial start that no court had compelled. Everything she had no legal claim to. Everything Marcus had decided she deserved anyway, because justice and cruelty are not the same instrument. And Marcus Dellum had never confused the two. The Dellum Subsurface Foundation was announced in May without a press release. A single post on the foundation's website. The endowment was $50 million. The scholarship program funded geoscience education for students from Concord, from the eastern North Carolina coastal plain, and from communities throughout the Mississippi Delta, places where the subsurface held wealth that the people living above it had never been given the tools to locate. The first cohort was 17 scholars. 3 were from Cabarrus County, from the same zip code Marcus had grown up in. When the Concord Tribune ran a short story about the foundation, his grandmother Estelle's longtime neighbor called to read it aloud, and then said, "She always told me that boy was reading the ground different than everybody else." I think I understand now what she meant. 8 months after the gala, on a Saturday morning at a community center in Northwest Washington, Marcus stood at a small podium in front of 40-odd people, scholars, parents, a few educators, and talked for 7 minutes without notes. The field journal sat beside him on the podium, worn and brown and present, the way it had always been present in every room where no one had thought to ask what was inside it. He was introduced correctly, for the first time in a very long time, by someone who had actually looked up what he did. Afterward, at a small gathering at a colleague's home, Marcus was near a window with a glass of water when a woman sat down across from him and asked about the journal, not as a joke, not as small talk. She looked at it on the table and asked what it was for. Her name was Renata James, environmental policy attorney, Georgetown Law, D.C. practice. She asked the question with the direct, unhurried curiosity of someone genuinely prepared to listen to the whole answer. Marcus told her about the first survey he had ever logged, in 2006, on a coastal formation in Senegal that no one else had thought worth examining. He told her about the shorthand he and Celestine had developed because they were the only 2 people who needed to read it. He told her about the last entry, written on the morning of October's gala, in a conference suite 23 floors above Charlotte. 2 words in shorthand, which translated roughly to, "It is done." Renata listened without interrupting. When he finished, she asked what the 2 words were. He told her. She nodded slowly, the way you nod when something lands exactly where it was supposed to. Then she refilled his glass of water without being asked, and they kept talking until the room had mostly emptied around them. That night, back at his hotel, Marcus opened a new journal. The spine cracked softly as he pressed it flat. The first page was completely blank, waiting in the way that only new things wait, without the weight of everything that came before. He wrote 1 line, then he closed it. He set it on the nightstand, turned off the lamp, and slept the sleep of a man who has finished one story and is only now beginning to understand the dimensions of the next. There is a lesson in what Marcus Dellum did, and it is not about what gets returned to you when the room finally sees you. It is simpler than that. The people who decide you are the background do not get to determine the structure. They only get to decide how long they go without understanding what they are standing on. And some people, given enough patience and enough precision and enough faith in what the ground holds, will build something so far beneath the visible surface that by the time the world arrives at the truth of it, there is nothing left to argue with. Marcus Dellum had understood that from the first survey he ever logged. He had simply been willing to wait for the world to catch up. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.